Who would rise as the victor in the greatest chariot battle in history? The 37,000 Hittites with 3,500 heavy war machines? Or the 20,000 Egyptians with only 2,000 swift chariots, under a pharaoh barely in his 20s? Could Muwatalli's false reports break Ramses before the fight even began? Would the ambush crush him when his divisions stood scattered and exposed? Or would the young pharaoh find the courage to rally his guard and fight back against impossible odds? This was not just a clash of armies. This was a fight for Kadesh, the city that held the lifelines of the ancient Near East. As both empires closed in, the stage was ready. Bronze would clash, blood would flow, and history would remember what happened next. The summer of 1274 BC, in the dusty crossroads of Syria, two empires were about to clash. Not for glory, not for plunder, but for survival itself. At the heart of their struggle stood one city, Kadesh. Whoever controlled Kadesh would control the trade routes linking Egypt to the riches of the Levant in Mesopotamia. To lose it meant weakness. To hold it meant dominance over the ancient Near East. Pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt, only in his 20s but already desperate to prove himself the greatest of kings, could not allow the Hittites to seize this prize. Across the battlefield, Muwatalli II, ruler of the Hittite Empire, had no intention of surrendering the city. Both leaders understood. This was more than a border dispute. It was a test of destiny. But the rivals were far from equal. Ramses brought an army of around 20,000 men, archers, spearmen, and about 2,000 chariots, divided into four great divisions: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Seth. His army was disciplined, but stretched thin across hostile terrain. Muwatalli, however, commanded an even greater force, over 37,000 soldiers, supported by nearly 3,500 war chariots. The Hittite chariots were heavier, built to carry 3 warriors each, a driver, a shield-bearer, and a spearman. They were mobile fortresses designed to smash through enemy lines with brutal force. The Egyptian chariots were different, lighter, faster, carrying only 2 men, a driver and an archer. They could not withstand a direct collision with the Hittite machines, but they could outmaneuver them, striking from a distance with deadly volleys of arrows. Speed and precision were their only hope against weight and brute strength. Each side had its strengths, each its fatal weaknesses. Ramses II relied on boldness and rapid movement, convinced that his god Amun guided his hand. Muwatalli II trusted deception, ambush, and the crushing power of overwhelming numbers. This was not simply a clash of armies. It was a collision of strategies. One empire betting on speed, the other on mass. One leader driven by divine ambition, the other by ruthless calculation. The stage was set for what would become the largest chariot battle the world had ever seen. And as the armies closed in on Kadesh, both Ramses and Muwatalli prepared to unleash every trick, every weapon, every ounce of cunning they possessed. But the road to battle was already filled with shadows. Ramses would soon discover that the enemy was closer than he believed, and that the first strike would not come from where he expected. The Egyptian army marched north, banners of Amun and Ra snapping in the desert wind. Ramses II rode at the head, his golden chariot gleaming under the sun, his confidence unshaken. He believed the gods were with him, and he believed the Hittites were far away. But Muwatalli had planned otherwise. The Hittite king had chosen Kadesh not just as a fortress, but as a stage for deception. Hidden behind the city walls and in the forest beyond, he gathered his massive host. He would let Ramses come close, too close, then strike when the Egyptians were scattered and unprepared. To set the trap, Muwatalli unleashed his greatest weapon, false intelligence. 2 men dressed as deserters were captured by Egyptian scouts. They swore that the Hittite army was still far to the north, days away from Kadesh. Ramses, eager to believe in quick victory, trusted their words, so he advanced recklessly. The division of Ra stretched behind him, while Amun pressed forward toward Kadesh. The divisions of Ta and Seth were still days behind, struggling along the dusty roads of Canaan. By the time Ramses reached the Orontes River, his army was spread thin, isolated pieces instead of one united force. Inside Kadesh, Muwatalli watched from the city walls. He had over 37,000 men hidden at his command. He had 3,500 chariots, heavier and deadlier than anything Ramses could field. And he knew the moment was coming. Ramses pitched his camp near Kadesh, certain that victory was within reach. His soldiers erected tents, prepared food, and watered their horses. The Pharaoh himself offered prayers to Amun, thanking the god for what he thought was already a triumph. Then the illusion shattered. Egyptian scouts captured more prisoners, real deserters this time. Under interrogation, they revealed the truth. The entire Hittite army was not far away at all. It was hiding behind Kadesh, ready to strike. Ramses' blood ran cold. He had walked straight into Muwatalli's trap, and before he could rally his scattered divisions, the thunder of hooves was already rising in the distance. The ground began to tremble. At first, it was a low murmur, a distant vibration. Then it grew into a roar, the thunder of 3,000 Hittite chariots exploding from behind Kadesh. Dust rose in great clouds, and the earth itself seemed to quake under the storm of hooves and wheels. The Egyptian division of Ra was the first to suffer. Stretched thin along the road, its men were caught completely unprepared. Hittite chariots slammed into their ranks like a tidal wave of bronze and wood. Spears pierced shields, axes split helmets. Horses screamed as iron wheels crushed men beneath them. The disciplined lines of Egypt shattered. Soldiers scattered, fleeing toward the river, chased by Hittite warriors who showed no mercy. Some were trampled in the water, others cut down as they tried to swim. It was slaughter. And then the Hittite tide rolled on, straight toward Ramses' camp. The Pharaoh's own division of Amun was still erecting tents when the enemy burst upon them. Panic spread like fire. Horses bolted, servants dropped their loads and ran. The camp dissolved into chaos as the storm of chariots smashed through the Egyptian lines. Ramses himself was nearly swept away. His golden chariot rocked violently as Hittite warriors lunged at him with spears. Arrows hissed through the air, shields splintered, men screamed in terror. The Pharaoh's guards fought desperately, slashing and thrusting to keep him alive. It was war in its rawest form, chariots chasing men across open ground, blades flashing, dust and blood mingling in the scorching sun. The roar of combat echoed across the plain like the wrath of the gods. For a moment it seemed certain. The Egyptian army would be annihilated, their king cut down in the dust of Kadesh. But Ramses refused to break. He tightened the reins, steadied his chariot, and prepared to fight, not just for his life, but for the very survival of Egypt. The Egyptian camp was collapsing. Tents burned, horses broke free of their tethers. Men scattered in terror, pursued by the relentless Hittite storm. Death was everywhere. But in the midst of the chaos, one figure stood unshaken. Ramses II, son of the gods, refused to fall. He seized the reins of his golden chariot, his eyes blazing with fury. Around him, his personal guard gathered, the last shield between Egypt and annihilation. With the roar of a lion, Ramses lifted his bow. Arrows flew in deadly arcs, striking down Hittite warriors who dared approach. Then, spurring his horses forward, he charged straight into the enemy tide. The Pharaoh's chariot cut through the battlefield like a lightning bolt. His guards followed, shouting war cries, spears thrusting, blades flashing in the sun. Wherever Ramses drove, the Egyptians rallied. Soldiers who moments before had fled now turned back, inspired by the sight of their king standing defiant against impossible odds. The Hittites, drunk on the thrill of slaughter, suddenly faced a different enemy, an enemy that refused to die. Their heavy chariots, once unstoppable, struggled to turn quickly enough to face the swift Egyptian counterattacks. Ramses darted in and out, loosing arrows, shattering morale, driving wedges into their formation. It was more than survival, it was defiance. Here was Ramses not hiding behind walls, not cowering in fear, but fighting with his own hands. proving to gods and men alike that he would not be broken. Still, the Hittites pressed hard. The battlefield was drenched in blood. Dust darkened the sky. The outcome hung by a thread. Ramses had bought his army precious moments, but it was not enough. He needed more than courage. He needed reinforcements. And from the south, through the choking dust, the banners of Ptah finally appeared on the horizon. The horizon blazed with new banners. The division of Ptah, long delayed on the dusty roads of Canaan, had finally arrived. Thousands of fresh Egyptian soldiers surged forward, their war cries cutting through the chaos like thunder. The battlefield shifted in an instant. From despair, hope was reborn. From near destruction, the Egyptians rose again. Ramses, his armor spattered with blood and dust, saw his reinforcements charging into the fray. He raised his bow high, signaling the counterattack. With a roar, the remnants of Amun and Ra joined Ptah, striking the Hittites with renewed fury. The plain erupted into madness. Egyptian chariots darted across the field, loosing volleys of arrows that cut down Hittite warriors. Infantry clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat, spears stabbing, shields locking, swords ringing. Horses screamed as men fell beneath hooves. The Hittites, once confident in overwhelming numbers, now felt the balance shift. Their heavy chariots, so deadly in the first charge, became clumsy in the swirling melee. Egyptian speed and discipline began to tell. What had been an easy slaughter turned into a desperate struggle. Still, the battle raged with no mercy. Warriors fought until their arms gave out, until their blades dulled with blood. The dust of Kadesh was so thick it blotted out the sun, turning day into twilight. The screams of men and animals mingled with the clash of bronze, a symphony of war echoing across the ages. Neither side yielded. Ramses fought like a man possessed, his chariot striking fear wherever it rolled. Muwatalli's warriors hurled themselves forward again and again, determined to crush the Pharaoh once and for all. But the Egyptians held. The trap had failed to break them. Against all odds, Ramses had turned the tide. Yet as the sun dipped low over the Orontes River, one truth became clear. Though the battlefield was littered with corpses, though the ground ran red with blood, neither Egypt nor the Hittites had won an outright victory. The struggle for Kadesh was not over. It had only transformed into something greater than swords and chariots. As the sun set over the blood-soaked plains of Kadesh, silence finally fell. The cries of the wounded replaced the clash of bronze. Horses lay broken beside shattered chariots. Thousands of warriors, Egyptian and Hittite alike, would never rise again. And yet, there was no victor. The Hittites still held the city. Ramses still held his army. Both sides had bled too deeply to claim true triumph. But appearances mattered. Back in Egypt, Ramses declared himself the conqueror of Kadesh. On temple walls at Luxor and Abu Simbel, he had scenes carved of himself standing alone against thousands, chariot blazing, bow drawn, Amun guiding his hand. To his people, he was the warrior king who had faced annihilation and turned it into glory. In Hattusa, the Hittite capital, Muwatalli's successors told another story. To them, Egypt had been humbled. To them, Kadesh remained unconquered. Each side proclaimed victory, but both knew the truth. They had fought each other to exhaustion. Years later, the war gave way to something unprecedented. Egypt and the Hittites signed what is today considered the world's first recorded peace treaty, a pact of non-aggression and alliance, carved into stone, copies of which still survive. It was a recognition that neither empire could destroy the other, and that survival demanded compromise. The Battle of Kadesh thus became more than a clash of chariots. It was a lesson in the limits of power. It showed that even the mightiest kings, even armies of tens of thousands, could be brought to a standstill. And yet, from the dust and carnage, a legend was born. For centuries, Ramses II would be remembered as the pharaoh who stood unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds. Not because he won outright, but because he endured, he fought, and he refused to fall. The roar of the chariots has long since faded, but the story of Kadesh, the greatest chariot battle in human history, still echoes across time, a reminder that even in war, survival itself can be the greatest victory.